Bueno, en honor al tiempo, we are on time, so we are going to start, Michael. Michael va en Campen, digamos, lidera un poco este proyecto de ver cómo se transforma todo lo que tiene que ver con investigación clínica a través de HL7, ¿sí? Usando FHIR. Es uno de los proyectos aceleradores, ¿sí? Por los cuales involucra distintos proyectos que quieren intentar adoptar FHIR en distintos dominios, ¿sí? Y digamos, va a ver, se enfoca principalmente en cómo usar FHIR en investigación clínica, ¿sí? Tomando datos directamente de la historia clínica, ¿sí? Y y de esta forma ver de qué forma se puede estandarizar esta investigación. ¿Sí? Michael Van Campen es Program Manager y director digamos, el director un poco de este proyecto que se llama Vulcano. Así que, Michael, you can start, and Diego will translate you Tenemos un canal alternativo, digamos, aquellos que quieran escucharlo. Michael va a hablar en inglés, tiene un inglés muy claro y va a hablar despacio, digamos, para aquellos que lo quieran escuchar en inglés. Pero en caso de que quieran escuchar una traducción en línea, tienen un canal alternativo para escuchar lo que va diciendo Michael en español. Yeah, you will have a online translator. Diego will be the our translator for your presentation. So, participant, we can switch between channels. Thank you for your for be part of this our conference, and welcome. And you can start whatever you want.
Thank you. Gracias. That is the extent of my other language, so I will stop there. And thank you, Fernando and Diego, on behalf of the Vulcan HL7 Accelerator. I'm excited to be here to present how our particular HL7 Accelerator is transforming clinical research. I will try to speak slowly so Diego can help us translate. Diego, if you give me a hand signal if I'm going too fast or too slow, a thumbs up or thumbs down, that would be appreciated. Thank you. I believe Fernando has probably introduced me to you, but I am the program manager for the HL7 Vulcan Accelerator, focused on clinical research and standards that are based on HL7 FHIR. My contact information is there, as well as for our Vulcan project. I'm hoping that the slides will be made available to meeting and conference participants, and we welcome your engagement. And so please don't hesitate from contacting me at any point after the presentation or while we have questions and answers. Wanted to talk a little bit about the background of why the Vulcan Accelerator came to be. So we have a few slides to present here. I think this slide here really talks about the coexistence of standards as they relate to clinical care and clinical research as kind of two hands in the same pot, so to speak, sharing a common thread around definition and use of data or health data. But the focus has been certainly in the standards area on clinical care, whether those are medication standards, laboratory standards, digital imaging, registries, identity management, and immunization data. Clinical research has lagged behind as it relates to standards. And so we've really had a bit of a catch up from the clinical research perspective on defining standards that help us identify candidates for clinical trials, that allow us to sift through data to provide meaningful insights into clinical care that will inform clinical practice. The good news from the clinical research and the Vulcan perspective is there are a lot of standards already in clinical care that we can leverage. And so 90% of the work has already been done. So that's hats off to anybody who has participated in the development of HL7 standards or even IHTSDO standards and the like. We are leveraging those wherever we can, but it really forms the genesis of why we need to have standards in clinical research. So the actual Vulcan Accelerator as a program had its genesis in September of 2019, where we actually looked at a number of different capabilities or requirements for standards in clinical research. And that basically formed the genesis for the project itself. The formal launch was in July of 2020. So we are now about a year and a half old as a Vulcan project. Now, when I say HL7 Accelerator, some of you may be familiar with the fact that there are now 7 HL7 accelerators. These programs all have a singular focus within them. I won't go through all of them here. Helios on the left-hand side is our newest HL7 accelerator. But the idea here is really to move the development and implementation, and I stress that word implementation, of standards using HL7 FHIR in an expedited or accelerated manner. So that's important. Those of you who may be familiar with how standards are developed, it's really, I use the word nebulous or unclear as to when a standard will be developed and when it will be available for use and when it will be implemented. The process for developing a standard is indeterminate. We don't know when that will be done. So the idea here is really to put a clear focus on the development of standards with these 7 accelerators. So a quick background on who is Vulcan and really kind of our stakeholder groups that we try to attract to the project. You'll see here, obviously, standards development organizations, industry groups, vendors that participate. But the focus really is kind of on the research academia, the government agencies, and the industry groups. Those are the groups that really need to come to our table to help us define standards in clinical research. So by government agencies, we talk about regulators, those that will have some input into the development of the standards, but also in the implementation side. So they will help support that. We don't want to lose track of our patients, of course, because we do have capacity for patient advocacy to make sure that whatever happens in clinical research improves patients' lives and in their safety, et cetera. So those are the kind of industry, or sorry, the groups that we attract within the HL7 Vulcan Accelerator. Just a quick slide on our current members. We are approaching 35 members within Vulcan. So you see a good cross-section of organizations and associations across each of those previous 6 categories. I'm happy to report that this continues to grow. So even though this says October 5th, we're anticipating a couple of large new organizations to join shortly, hopefully before year end. But we definitely see a lot of interest in Vulcan, and it speaks to the fact that clinical research standards have an enormous need through these organizations. Don't want to spend a lot of time here, but I just wanted to let you know that we do have a formal governance structure that's set up through our steering committee that sets direction for Vulcan and priorities. We have an advisory council that provides us lessons learned, best practice, and advice on standards in the clinical research area. Our operations committee is the heart of our organization. It really reflects our members and their ability to influence the project and the program. And then we have a number of project teams. We have 5 of those at present. We'll talk about those shortly. And they have a specific focus, whether that's on extracting real-world data out of EHR systems, or whether that is identifying a adverse event approach that will clearly identify adverse events during clinical trials or through other processes. On the actual operational side, we have leadership through our two co-chairs. Both Rob and Amy are with FHIR and have provided fantastic leadership over the past year and a half, and will continue into 2022. And then our project management office, you see with myself, Hugh Glover, Madeline, and Stacy, basically provide the day-to-day direction for the project, for the program. I want to take a moment here to describe some of the key constructs that we have within the program itself, so that we can identify those, and hopefully they'll spawn some conversation here. So Vulcan, the vision here is really trying to bring together those in clinical care and clinical research through HL7 FHIR standards. And the idea here is not to actually build things that have already been built, but to bring the various collaborators together in a forum that allows them to harmonize their approaches using HL7 FHIR. So basically around bridging gaps, connecting industry collaborations, maximizing our collective resources, and then delivering tools and solutions. A lot of work has been done already in certain areas of clinical research, but we also know that there's a lot more to do, and we need to bring the people who are all affected or working in this area together. So we have 4 goals for Vulcan. I think I addressed those a little bit. Bridging the gaps, so that, and actually interesting on the strategically connecting collaborators, it's about raising awareness. Many people are working on initiatives, for example, on adverse events, but they don't know they're all doing it. So bringing them together and looking for commonalities, common approaches, certainly will help the whole stakeholder community. Maximizing collective resources. We can't afford to do things 20 different ways and 20 different times. So again, as much as we can, bringing those resources to bear, and then delivering a set of tools and solutions that really will provide direction for the research community, whether that's through pharma or that's through academia. We set up a number of strategic goals within the Vulcan initiative. I won't go through this in detail, but suffice it to say that when we look at operationalizing the Vulcan Accelerator, we do need to make sure that it is provides value to our stakeholders in the clinical research community, and that it actually is balanced across each of the various stakeholder requirements and needs. A small plug here, if you will, for our use case process. So we do have an intake process where we try to solicit or elicit input from the larger community to try and bring in other use cases that might be worthwhile to pursue. Those go through a process internal to Vulcan for approval, and why we have 5 projects through Vulcan at this point. I'll talk a little bit about some of our emerging projects as well. This tries to describe our process to a certain extent. On the left-hand side is really how we ingest use cases or projects. And those are either input through those forms or provided through a strategic process. At some point, we output various initiatives and Vulcan projects that go through a process through Connectathon. And those of you may or may not be familiar, but it is a way to test the development of our work products, which typically end up as implementation guides. But we follow an HL7 methodology here to implement our standards through HL7 ballots, but we test it out through Connectathons. So these are HL7 methods over the last, that transpire 3 times a year. And we have recent experience from 3 of our 5 projects in the September Connectathon, and we have another 3 going to our January Connectathon in 2022. And those are put back into the development of the standards, so that whole process. So it's a form of an iterative or agile methodology here where we're testing aspects of the standards. This is a little different than perhaps a traditional standards development process, where I'll admit it's mainly a paper exercise. The use of a Connectathon really allows us to test specific aspects of the standard, and we'll see some results of that in the slides I'll present shortly. So to that point, we have a number of different projects. I'll provide you just a quick summary and overview and then walk into a couple of them. And then hopefully we'll leave enough time for some questions for you. So these are our 5 Vulcan projects that are currently underway. So schedule of activities, real world data, phenopackets, electronic product information, and adverse events. So you can read the objectives, but let me just quickly highlight the schedule of activities is really looking at the activities that surround a clinical trial and having those in a standardized fashion and communicated across all the various stakeholders. There is an LZZT protocol. I'm not familiar with it personally. Please don't ask a question about it. But that's one example of where the Connectathon is focusing on one particular aspect of the schedule of activities. So they're really focusing on that one area. Our real world data has a larger scope in general, but they're really trying to get data out of frontline systems or EHRs into a format that's suitable for clinical research. So this may also be known as real world evidence, but it is basically extracting data from frontline systems. And you can imagine there are many challenges with this particular project, only in the sense that every frontline system or EHR is different. There are, even within the use of a singular system at a particular hospital, doctors and nurses, et cetera, record information in slightly different fashions. So the challenge here is really to try and find some methods and standards to extract data out of this for clinical research purposes. They are focusing on the FDA, or the Food and Drug Administration in the US's Gateway program initially. Phenopackets is also an interesting initiative under Vulcan, really to try and learn the genomic medicine and genomic research phenotypical information. Again, I'm not a clinical person, so I can't speak to all of the details here, but they're currently looking at a modeling approach to extracting that information out of EHRs. So one could argue the Phenopackets group is a variant of the real world data project, but it's specifically looking at genomic research and genomic medicine standards. 2 of our more recent projects include electronic product information, and that is looking for standards to communicate basically monograms or information about medicinal products or medicines in standardized formats. Some may be familiar with a structured product labeling standard in HL7, but bringing that to the forefront within HL7 FHIR and expanding that. And the last project that we have that's active is our adverse events project. That was just getting kicked off. I'll talk a little bit about that later, but there are a number of, I'll say, projects that are implementing adverse event reporting that need to be harmonized or brought into a standardized form. So I'll go relatively quickly through this so that I give ourselves enough time for any questions. The schedule of activities project participated in our previous September Connectathon. And you can see on the right-hand side some of the nitty and gritty results. So created some Python code. They created a service request resource within HL7 FHIR. And then they also looked at creating the overarching care plan. So those are all aspects within the schedule of activities, so that they actually have some clarity, some examples that actually will test out their implementation guide around schedule of activities. On the real world data, concomitant, I cannot say that word properly, sorry, medications. So they were looking at one aspect of real world data, which is really trying to extract medications out of an electronic health record system. And I think they had very good success in their September Connectathon, and are participating again in January. But you see the highlight on the diagram on the right-hand side. That's just one aspect of their whole process. So again, it highlights how we want to test out the work of each of these projects, and then move on to other areas, so that our implementation guides and standards at the end have some credibility in implementation. As I mentioned, our adverse events project has just started. They were participating in their first Connectathon this coming January. We have identified a number of different projects in June and asked them to participate in a roundtable, just to raise awareness of what we're trying to do within Vulcan. Then we went through our internal process to approve the project. The map that you see in the bottom right-hand corner, the landscape, was trying to identify some of the commonalities. And this is where I think Vulcan can add some value. And then really hone in on specific areas. So some of these 7 initiatives are using common standards. And you'll see the iCare data initiative, perhaps if your eyes are good, Unicom, PatientLink, and FDA Best. So some of these are all using specific aspects and specific standards. And I think that this is really trying to highlight those projects and what they're trying to do. So this project is just getting started. The last one I want to talk a little bit about today is our electronic product information, our EPI project. This is actually being supported out of the European Union through Gravitate Health. And they are a large organization sponsored through the IMI, the European Medicines Agency. Yes, I'll get that right. And they are putting a lot of effort into making this particular work global and not just based in the European Union. So we're initiating that project just at this past summer, and they participated in the September Connectathon and looking to participate in January as well. Just to give you a sense of some of the numbers within Gravitate Health, fairly large initiative going on in the European Union. A couple of other initiatives, and then I think that's my last slide, Fernando. We are also looking at FHIR and OMOP. Some of you may be familiar with what OMOP is, Observational Medical Outcomes Partnership. And it is a data model for EHR data warehouse or analytics. So mapping across FHIR and OMOP is a need that's been identified through a number of participants in Vulcan. We're also looking at sample data, generating sample data for clinical research. That's a requirement across all our accelerators, but in the clinical research community as a whole. And we're looking to establish over the next few months a Vulcan FHIR server so that each of our various projects can test FHIR release 4 and release 5 and any extensions, etc. And with that, I think I am at time. I leave my contact information there, and thank everyone for your time and attendance. Fernando, I'll turn it back to you to facilitate any further discussion or questions.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting. Let me check If there are questions, si hay preguntas las pueden postear en el chat y si no levantan la mano y les doy permiso para que pregunten. If there are any questions, they can put it in the chat or they can, I can grant them to open the mic. So I have a question for you.
Okay.
The main project is using with adverse event. And here there is a project here in Latin America that they try to report some adverse events in the immunization, mainly focus on the recent immunization about COVID, something that the timeline was short too much to, I don't know, maybe in the past, one immunization take 5 years of investigation and testing, and now in 3 months we have a new immunization. So they try to report these adverse events. But when they started to try to work with FHIR, we noticed that even advanced event is in maturity level 0. How do you work in your project with this kind of resource so immature?
How do we work with an immature resource?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the formal term is hardening or accelerating the use of that by testing it out. So the idea for us is to actually accelerate and bring those to a formal ballot. So we need requirements such as the project in Argentina or in your region, and that input into that so that we can bring it forward to the next release. So our project will be actually pushing the adverse event resources in FHIR to the next release, because our adverse event report, adverse event project requires that. So our project itself, so what I would suggest is people join the Vulcan Accelerator, and we will be pushing that forward in an expedited fashion. So in other words, we can participate in Vulcan, and through that process, move those HL7 resources into the next release and make them appropriate for use in various parts of the world.
Great, thank you. So, okay, there are no more questions, so we are on time. Thank you very much for your presentation. It's a great project. The numbers says everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge scope.
Yes, thank you very much, Fernando, for the opportunity to speak to the conference today. I would kindly ask that if people are interested, please fire an email to our Vulcan email address, or visit us online or through Confluence. There's lots of information available to folks who are interested.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Michael. Bye.